So this is module 4 from Qdabra's DBXL training. The purpose of this lab is to query data from your Active Directory. Why do we want to do that? The main purpose is Active Directory has a lot of information about your company's organization, about your employees, about your company's structure, and there's no need to recreate all of that in a SQL list or in a SharePoint table. There's no need to recreate that when it's available in Active Directory. For example, if you need an email, we can just query Active Directory and get that person's email instead of having a SharePoint list or having a SQL table with a list of emails. So this lab, the purpose of this lab is to show you how to populate fields in your InfoPath form automatically without having the user enter any information manually. We're going to perform some changes to our expense report form. Step by step, what we're going to do is the following. We're going to detect who the currently logged in user is. Based on that knowledge, we can populate that user's name and that user's email. Once we know who the currently logged in user is, we can detect that user's manager and populate it, his or her manager name and manager email address. So that's the content of this lab. Can you query more data from Active Directory? Yes, of course. And let me just fire up a data connection here to show you what we can do. So in all of these data connections for Active Directory, we're going to receive data from a SOAP web service, and we know the training site URL. And this is a web service that we haven't used. We have used DBXL document service. In this case, we are using the AD user info. So again, like the other web services contained in DBXL, you can, once you enter the URL here, you're going to get back a list of operations, and you're going to have to select one of those operations. In our case, the form opens and we want to detect who the current user is. So there's a web service that does it. It's called Get My Info, an operation that does it. So here's the operation, Get My Info. It says gives the Active Directory properties of the currently logged in user. It doesn't take any parameters, so that's it. That's all we need to do. Get My Info, automatically retrieve data on load. Perfect. We don't need to do anything else. So let me show you in a very raw fashion what Get My Info does. And to do that, I'm going to drag the data fields into my canvas. This is going to look ugly. It's very raw, but the purpose is to show you how much information is pulled down from Active Directory. Okay, so there's all sorts of keys, and then for each key there's a value. So there's complete name, there's surname, and there's, so on and so on. Display name. This is my alias. There's my manager. There's my email, and so on. The information that displays here, the keys that are available, vary from company to company. So you might not have a male nickname. I'm just guessing, right? You might not have a display name. I'm not sure. Might not have a distinguished name. It really depends on how Active Directory is set up, what is defined. Maybe there's no title defined. Maybe there's no description defined. We never know. But you can do what we just did here to understand which keys are getting returned. And once you understand which keys are getting returned, you can plan. So I closed that a little bit prematurely because what I want to do is I want to just take inventory of what's available. So what's available is this. We have a account name, right? So let's call it an alias. That alias goes by that key. We have email address, which is simply mail, and then we have name, which is my full name equals name. So now those are the three that we're going to be working with. You could work with any keys. Any key that is returned via Active Directory you can use in your form, but for the purposes of this training lab, we are just going to use those three keys. So when the form loads, we're going to know who the current user is, and we can say on form load, let's set the value of the employee name, and let's also set the value of the employee email, right? But I want to put a condition on this, and the condition is that there's no previous information filled out. So the employees are filling out this form, not the managers. So let's say the employee opens the form, I want to populate this. If somebody else opens the form afterwards, I don't want this information to be populated, so I'm going to put a condition here, and the condition is that there's no name. Right, so let's call this fill in Active Directory data if blank. So I have my sort of my placeholders here, but I need to put in my actual values. And to get my values, I just have to insert field or group and go to get my info, which is the data connection that is returning this data. And you'll remember that we got back a table of keys and values. And I always want to get the value back, but I also need to filter by the key. So anytime you're working with Active Directory data connections coming from DBXL, this is the same procedure. You're going to select the value, filter data, add, and then you're going to filter the key. Key is equal to something. So in the case of this current one, we know that the key that we want is name because we just looked at that table. In the case of the email address, same thing, insert field or group, get my info. We're going to grab a value, but we're going to filter that data based on the key. And in the case of the email address, we saw that it was simply mail. And there we go. So if the name is blank, we're going to populate the name, and we're going to populate the email address. So let's check that. There we go. Pretty straightforward. Now, the one thing we did not do is we did not store the current user's alias. And it is highly recommended that we do so. So let me just add the alias field here, and I'll also do the same thing for the manager. So manager alias. So now I have an employee alias and I have a manager's alias, and one of the reasons we want to do this is because it's going to be helpful down the line for permissions. So the permissions module is not going to be covered in this instance of the training, but if you're going to end up working with permissions down the road, then it's important to have this alias stored in the form. So if I go back to form load, I'm setting my name, I'm setting my email. I also need to set the alias. So again, insert field or group, get my info, data fields value, and filter based on the key. Now, we used the name and we used the email, so what's remaining here is the SAM account name. So that's what we want here, SAM account name. So now we're getting the employee's name, email, and alias. Great. How do we get the manager information? Well, we need a new data connection. And that data connection is going to receive data from a web service, same deal as before. And this is from our training site, AD user info. And again, we allow InfoPath to load a list of operations. And within the list of operations, there is a operation called get manager alias. So this is going to detect the manager alias. Okay, it needs a parameter. For now, we don't need one because it's a dynamic data connection. It's not always going to be me opening the form, right? It's going to be other people are going to be opening the form, so I don't need to provide that parameter right now. But I do need to uncheck automatically retrieve data. So I'm going to add another rule on the one here, which is called get manager alias. And I need a condition, and the condition is pretty straightforward. The condition is, well, I need to know who the current employee is. So if I have an employee alias, so that means the employee alias is not blank, then I can get the manager's alias. Without an alias, I can't do it. And the key here is I need to set the value of that alias before I can query. So to set the value of the alias, I have to go to my get manager alias data connection and look in the query fields, and there's my username. So this username is going to get set dynamically in the form rules. It's not something that's hard-coded in the data connection. So there's my username, and I'm going to set it equal to my alias that's stored here, and I move it up. So the logic here is, if I have an employee alias, I'm going to set the username equal to that alias, and then I'm going to query to get that manager's alias. Okay, now I want to show you the result of get manager alias in the same way that I showed you the result of get my info. And the reason I want to do that is because get manager alias doesn't give me much. It just gives me the manager's alias, and that's it. It's pretty literal. So there it is. It's pretty literal. It doesn't give me anything else, just the alias. So there's a couple of steps that we're missing, and to be specific, we need another data connection. So this is our third data connection, and again, receive data, web service, and here we need our training site and our AD user info web service, and we let InfoPath connect, and it's going to return a list of operations. And the operation that we want in this case is get user info. Get user info is going to get the entire set of Active Directory information for a specific username. And again, we don't need to provide anything here because we're going to provide that dynamically in the form. But I do have to uncheck automatically retrieve data. So back to form load. We're going to fill in the employee's Active Directory data if it's blank. We're going to get the manager's alias. And you can add more conditions here. For example, if the manager name is blank, right? We don't want to redo this. And then we need a new action, which is get manager info. So the way to what we need is we need a condition, because we can't do this without a manager alias. We can't do any of what we're about to do without a manager alias. So the manager alias cannot be blank. Okay, but we haven't set the value of manager alias, so we have to go back to our previous rule. And after we query using a data connection get manager alias, we actually have to set that value. Because if we don't set it, then we can't do anything with it. So there's my manager alias. and I'm just going to go and grab the result from getManagerAlias, which was just that one field that we saw at the bottom of the form. So there we go. So we're querying, and then we're setting the manager alias, and then if there's a manager alias, we can go and set the query value for getUserInfo. So there's our username, and we can set that equal to the manager's alias, and then we can query using getUserInfo. So again, I'm just making this a habit. I want to make sure that I show you the full result of ADUserInfo. The result of ADUserInfo is very similar to the result of getMyInfo. The idea is that we're returning the entire set of data that is available for that user in Active Directory. So here it is. Big set of data, right? Again, we don't care about most of it. We just care about two things. We care about the name and the email. So back to form load, getManagerInfo. Once I have queried for the data here, then I can set those values in the main data source. I can set the manager name, and again, I'm setting the manager name from getUserInfo. Always select value, filter data, and key. So the manager name, and then the manager email. I think it was mail, actually. Mail. Okay. So if you notice, these two, value with the filter key equals name, value with the key equals mail. That looks pretty much the same as this. Value key name, value key mail. So you start seeing a pattern, right, in the usage of Active Directory. And once you get the hang of it, it becomes fairly easy to understand. But it's that idea of obtaining a value but filtering it based on the key. So let me preview this form. Make sure everything's executing the way we expect it to. There we go. We have my name, we have my email, manager's name, manager's email. There's one final thing that we can do here, and this is not related to DBXL. This is just smart form design, best practice. Since we're pulling in that data from Active Directory, there's no reason for the users to type in here. So let's just make those fields read-only. That data is getting populated automatically. So, no reason to allow the user to change those values. There we go. So those are changed now, read-only. This also prevents people from submitting the form with somebody else's name or somebody else's email. So there we go. I can't type into this. You can't see me typing, but yeah, I can't type into these. And that wraps up Module 4. It was a pretty short module. I want to emphasize the availability of other Active Directory methods. We don't have time to go through all of these, of course, in this training, but there is a big, long user guide available on our website, and it goes through all of the operations that are available as part of the Active Directory web service. And if you need additional information, then you can come to this file and take a look at the other operations and see what else can be done. Just as an example, there's things like you can limit the number of results. You can get all users if you wanted to get all the users in your domain. You can get the group membership for a specific user. You can perform search operations where you can find a user by a name, or you can find users by an alias. You can get all the employees for a manager, so you can specify the manager alias and get back all of the employees that are managed by that person. So this goes through and steps through each of the operations. So you can take a better look at each one of those.